Hello. Thank you for joining me today for a session about amplifying student voice and choice, empowering learners in the classroom. This is something that I'm super passionate about, and I'm excited to share with you some ideas how you can make some small moves and maybe some big shifts also in your classroom. So here's what I'd love to cover in this time. We're going to talk a little bit about what exactly is student voice and choice. It's words that we hear all the time, but what does that really mean? And talk a little bit about the rationale. Why is this so important, especially in 2023? And then we're going to break it down to some small shifts you can take in your classroom tomorrow or on Monday or next week, whenever you can. These are little shifts that can make some really big changes to increasing student voice or increasing student choice. And then I'm going to encourage you to go a little bit farther and talk about some big shifts you can take in your classroom or your educational environment and how you can really take it to the next level at shifting the idea of student voice and choice as a real priority in your classroom. And then finally, we're going to set some plans. What do we do? How can we really get this started? All right, so let's get started. Before we start, I just want to share a little bit about myself. My name is Bertana. I am currently the Instructional Technology Coordinator in Glenview, Illinois, in the northern Chicago suburbs. This is my third year there. Prior to that, I spent many years in another suburban district where I served as a special education teacher, an instructional coach, and a technology specialist in a K-8 district. I do happen to have 3 degrees in education. I can truly call myself a lifelong learner, I think, at this point. So I have a degree in administration, in reading and literacy, and then finally in instructional technology, all things that are really important to me. And I am wrapping up. I'm getting there. I've got 25 years in education. You can find me on Twitter or I guess X now, at Bertana, and I have an Instagram account called Feed Your Creative Soul. So let's really start by talking about what exactly is student voice and choice, and what does that look like in a primary classroom all the way up to a middle school classroom or beyond. So before we even talk about this, I want you to take a moment, grab a piece of paper, grab an open Google Docs, whatever works for you. And I want you to really think about putting yourself in a student seat in your classroom or in your teaching environment. Think for a minute, what is it like to be a student in your room? So I've got some guiding questions that I want you to take a few minutes to really think through, because I think when we take and shift the perspective as to what is it like to be a student in my classroom, you might really see some things that you didn't really think about before. Perfect example are all those beginning of the year institute days that we have to sit and get the entire time. Anyway, all right, so thinking about that, we want to talk about a couple of things. Time. What does the time look like? What kind of opportunities do students have choice in? What kind of materials are present in your classroom? What opportunities do students have to use agency or independence? Also, what about relevance, willpower, and energy? So let's take it even a step further. So thinking about your classroom or an environment that you are currently practicing in or have practiced in, thinking about these guiding questions, we're going to take about 3 minutes, and I'm going to set a timer because trying to take wait time on a recording is tricky. Number one, when are students expressing themselves, their thoughts and ideas? So when in your classroom is that opportunity there? And are those moments prompted by the teacher, or are they independent? And then think about, how do students use their voice in your classroom currently? So again, thinking about these 3 questions and also materials, choice, agency, let's take 3 minutes to just jot down some things that you are experiencing or students might be experiencing in your classroom. we're about halfway through, jot down any thoughts you have about what it's like to be a student in your classroom. Final thoughts down on paper. Thank you so much for that. My timer started over again. I think it's important that we take time to ink our thinking. I think often in education, we are always just jumping in. So, really, this is going to allow us to set our thoughts up to where our student voice and choices in our current classroom environment. So, hopefully, that was an enlightening kind of experience for you. And maybe you've got great things in place already. Let's take a look. I wanted to share, this is a photo from a book, and I'm sorry that's cut off at the bottom. It's called From Kids First, from Day One. A great resource. I definitely recommend. And so here are just some guiding thoughts too, as you think about student voice and choice. And we just think a lot about choices, but I like that this really broke it down even further. So thinking about time, we just started our school year in many places, and the stamina of our current kindergartners is not, not where we'd like it to be. So really thinking about that and how do we build that stamina for our students? Also choice. We know that students thrive on just basic choices. Do you want red or blue? And what does that look like? Are there opportunities for that? Next is the idea about materials and space and thinking about what does that look like? Are they age appropriate? Is the space conducive to all of your students? And then agency. And I think this is one as the parent of a tween now, thinking about this and how do we allow students to have power or take that power from them as we are teaching them to be problem solvers. And I think that's something that I'm struggling as a parent and also as an educator of really trying to create those opportunities that allow students to build their agency. In addition, independence. And I think, again, this is something we don't always think about at the beginning of the school year, but so powerful to be able to create opportunities for students to build their independence in those little baby steps from the beginning is huge in the long term, especially when we think about voice and choice. If we're giving kids those little opportunities to build their skill set, that's going to pay out in dividends. I think relevance. We don't always think about relevance when we think about younger students, but that's so important for even our youngest students, but especially for our middle school students for sure. Energy. Sometimes our kids just really struggle. Are there times where I can give them that downtime? Are there times in the day that I know my kids have better energy than others? So just some really other thoughtful ideas when it comes to voice and choice. Again, I can't recommend this book well enough. It's one I've had for several years and just one I always go back to. And just really has some great ideas about giving some of those really making your classroom that child-centered classroom. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what it is and kind of given some more descriptors to voice and choice and what it all entails. But what about the why? And I think in our hearts we know the why, but let's talk a little bit about some of the why in rationale here. Andrew Miller, on his post on Edutopia, talks about this quote that I think just really sums up why I'm so passionate about this. Not only can voice and choice create more engagement in learning, but giving students agency can also empower them to become self-directed learners. And when I think about what I want for my son as a parent, but what I want for all of the students that we support is I want them to be self-directed learners. And that is something that we are really struggling with in my district. And I'm not sure if you're feeling the same in your location, but really our students having that self-directed and having that autonomy and wanting to move forward. And I think we have to give them the scaffolds to be successful in becoming that self-directed learner. And by giving voice and choice, that is exactly what we're able to do. I also threw this in. Originally, I shared some of these ideas in my own district, and we're a Charlotte Danielson district for our evaluation process. And we talked a lot about how much of what we're looking for in our evaluation is students having that choice and voice and taking ownership of their learning and how important that is. So I left this in here because that might also be something that's a rationale for you as well. Wanted to include that. So we've talked a lot about the what is it, and we've talked about the why, but let's talk about the practicality when it comes to actually trying to make some small shifts to increase student voice. So I'm going to share some ideas and some technology tools that we are currently using in my district that have allowed us to really start empowering students with that, taking more voice and having the opportunity to share their voice in our classrooms. So let me go back. So here's some ideas that we have currently in place in our district, and we're so easy to step up. One is wall space. And you're thinking probably, Patience, what are you talking about with voice with wall space? Several of our classrooms, both from elementary all the way up to our middle school, have selected a section of their classroom that students have ownership of decorating. It is the students who own this wall space. In our middle school classroom, students bring in artwork that they're proud of. It might be clippings from somewhere, from probably printed from the internet, of course, but it's things that are important to them. Obviously, we talk about guidelines and we share, this is a shared community space and we have to be positive. In elementary school, think about how many times kids bring you artwork or they bring things that are important to them. How cool to have a space in your room that they can just put those things. So we have like our middle school ELA teachers are doing this, all the way down to our first grade teachers have opportunities where they have a space in their room where they just keep revolving artwork there and things that are important to the students. And again, giving up that little bit of space, one less bulletin board or one less space that you have to be responsible for, can really make a statement to students that this is our shared community. And this is how I make sure that you know that what you care about is important to me too. Another idea is question of the day. And so really simple in that when they start their day, many classrooms have a question that goes up that students answer. At the beginning of the year, it's the teachers generating those questions, and students are just kind of sharing something. And it might be simple as a do you like chocolate or vanilla? Or it might be, do you like breakfast or dinner? And some simple things, but later on it can become even more specific to content or specific to student interests. As the year goes on, we have the students start creating the questions. How cool is it for a student to say, that was my question that I wanted to know an answer to, or one that I wanted to see what my classmates thought about. In the middle school, you can even use appropriate song lyrics or appropriate clips from something that they want to share with the class. And really just giving that little bit of ownership, maybe at the start of the class or the end of the class, to students. Another piece that we desperately need is opportunities for kids to practice positive peer feedback. There is such a need for this skill set, and it really is a skill set, but it's also something that is so incredibly important. Students care about what we as educators think. They care. But when it comes to their peers, either in their classroom or outside in the world, they care what their peers think and what their peers' feedback is to them. Now, in order for this to be successful, you have to teach students how to give that positive feedback. And I'm going to share a template that I have from Seesaw that we've used. But definitely, it's one of those things you can't just put it out there. You have to teach students. And I'm talking teaching students from kindergarten to give that positive feedback all the way to middle school. And it's creating a structure for that then it allows students to really have that be part of your classroom culture. I also love the idea of having options for modalities for responding. As I shared, I worked in special education for years, and I've worked to support variety of classrooms. In my current district, we have a large population of students who are learning English, who are new to the country. And so we really need to find ways that all students can participate and share their voice. I also happen to identify as an introvert. If you haven't read the book Quiet, and kind of from it'll come to me, the title, the author will come to me, but really thinking about how do we make sure we're hearing everybody's voice and not just always the loudest voice. And so there's a lot of digital tools out there, but you can always go back to a good old whiteboard and have students write their response, or have opportunities for students to record their responses ahead of time so they're not on the spot. You can have kids work together in cooperative groups so that everyone gets an opportunity to share, even though you might not have time for your entire class to share. But really making sure that we have opportunities to hear all voices in our classroom. This was another idea that I hadn't thought of, but the idea of having some kind of an icebreaker, bear with me, I know we're still coming off of those Opening Institute days, an icebreaker when students are working in small groups. We assume that kids know each other in our classroom because we've built classroom community and we've done a lot of those things, but perhaps just having an easy question or something simple that they answer together before they get into the meat of the content or the meat of what you're asking them to do. So for example, as you pair students, have them just ask, what'd you have for breakfast? Or ask, what is your favorite color? Some really basic questions so that they're able to build on the ability to connect before they have to jump into answering questions that might be more challenging for them. I always encourage our teachers who are working with our native language learners to really try to build some vocabulary ahead of time so that the students have the language to answer these questions. Another thing, and I did this as a middle school teacher, sometimes it was rough, but I think we also want to think about how do we get student feedback on our lesson? I've had those lessons where I was like, oof, I don't think that went so well. And I really just want to get feedback from my students. What do you think I could have done differently? What do you think we should do as a class? Or, I think that went really well. Why do you think that went really well? And even our youngest students can give that explanation. I think giving students, again, if our goal is creating self-directed learners and students who have autonomy for their learning, having them give feedback on their lesson can be super powerful, and one small shift that you can make. All right, so let me shift into some of the technology tools that we currently use in our district to kind of help us move along. You're probably familiar with Flip. It was Flipgrid, and then Microsoft now owns it. We have our students use this tool starting probably about third grade, because it's a little bit trickier for our younger students to be able to log in. If you're not familiar with Flip, it's a cool tool that allows you to post a question and then students create a video response. Now, I don't love seeing myself on video, but our students really are in that YouTube generation. My son, when he was tiny, was making his, pretend videos. So it's a way for students to be able to respond to a prompt in a video format, which most of them love. And then they can see each other's and get feedback there. One of the ways we've done this is just to have students do an introduction to the class. It allows them to kind of practice ahead of time. We've also done book reviews. So if you're not sure what books, I finish a book and I love it and I want to share it with other students, I could do a flip here. A great tool that I highly recommend. We are also a Seesaw district. If you are not a Seesaw district, it is one of my favorite tools as an educator and a parent. So Seesaw is a digital portfolio tool, but has so many options for students to be creative as well. Just like Flip, where you could have students respond to video, students can also do that in Seesaw, and it's a little bit more user-friendly for our youngest learners. We have actually already, we're in week 3 of school as I'm recording this, and we've had our kindergartners already producing work on Seesaw. Excuse me. They are not afraid of trying new things, and just another great way to have students be able to share their voice, either in writing or in video or drawing. Obviously, our kindergarten students, most of them are at the drawing phase. All right, so let's take a moment and take a shift, talk a little bit about small shifts of choice. I'm gonna take a drink real quick. So small shifts in choice. We've talked about voice. Now let's talk a little bit about choice. When I was in the classroom, towards the end of the time that I was a classroom teacher, I had actually built a shared space and built it so that it was our classroom instead of my classroom. And I know many teachers have already done this. They've gotten rid of their desks and they have shared spaces. But really, I think it's about creating opportunities for students to really feel like it's their classroom, but having opportunities. We know that, flexible seating is a huge thing right now, or has been a huge thing. We've got many different options for students in many classrooms. And I think sometimes that can get really scary, but it's all about creating those structures and systems to make it work. So really just the idea of having a shared space. And flexible seating, if it's scoop chairs or being able to move. Just today, I was finishing up map testing with some of our students, and we were just laying on our bellies on the couch in our library trying to finish it, because just trying to get comfortable. I think about as an adult, I know how I need to move and work best. And I think sometimes we need to teach our kids that it's okay that sitting in a desk isn't always the best way to work. And so giving them some of that option, be it flexible seating, doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can literally be sitting on the floor instead of sitting at their desk. But again, creating the guidelines and structures for that. Another thing that I've created, and I know many of the teachers in my district have, is a student station for supplies. I'm one of those teachers, like, I don't care if you don't have a pencil, I'll give you a pencil. If I have to buy 1 million pencils, I will do that. Just was my philosophy. But I think when you create a station that is where all of the things are, students love flare pens, all of those things, where you have built a classroom community where it is our shared space, students take a little more pride in that. And so really creating a place with a stapler or whatever it might be, where students can go and get the supplies that they need. And you might be wondering, what is that about choice? Well, think about it. If a student has an opportunity to use a orange pen, or has an opportunity to staple their work into a book, just those little things can really make a big difference for students. Another thing, and I know, is trying to create groups for students. And so often we are very intentional in how we're grouping students. And so that's important. And as we do that, but are there opportunities where you can sometimes give students choice in that group? And sometimes giving choice means maybe I don't want to work with anyone and I want to work alone. And really talking about that opportunity is really an important thing too. Again, thinking about students who have different comfort levels with working with others and really giving that opportunity of choice. I think choice boards are another great option, but I always want to say, don't go overboard. We can get way too involved and create these elaborate choice boards, and then we have to figure out how to assess them and how to keep track of what everyone's doing. So don't go overboard with your choice boards. A choice board can be as simple as a tic-tac-toe grid or even a 4x4 grid. It does not need to be an elaborate game board with all of those things. And by all means, if that's your thing, that's great too. But giving kids choices in how that they are practicing material. And I think we're all really familiar with the idea of differentiating for final product. I think it gets scary when we think about assessing those final products. And really, that requires us to be thoughtful when we're developing our rubrics. Are we developing the rubrics about the learning rather than the product? And so that's a switch you have to make. But again, if we have students who are very artistic and very creative and they want to do their final product in that way, or do we have students who are much more want to do something very linear and have something very simple and take a straight up test, and really talking about students with that. One little asterisk here is that you can't do all of these things all of the time. And really, it's about the idea here is to take some small shifts. What's one or two of these things that you could try? And it's about giving students the guidelines and the structure. It's not just a free-for-all kind of choice. All right, so a couple of tools that I absolutely adore for supporting some of these ideas is Jamboard. It is a Google Suite product. I love it for a couple of things, but this is one of my absolute favorites. It's an ability for students to check in. Made very popular during our pandemic teaching, but I think it's still a great way to do this, is that you could, when we're having students have choice or you want to know where all students are working, with here you have a grid that has all of the student numbers, and perhaps a student then takes and creates a virtual Post-it note to put it to say what they're working on or where they're at for the day. I've also seen this done in a non-tech way, which was brilliant. I worked with an incredible second grade teacher, and she just had a poster up like this. I think it might have even been an old calendar. Remember when we used to use those calendar grids? And she had actual paper Post-it notes. The kids would post what they were working on that day. She also used different colors each day, so it allowed her to keep track of who had put a Post-it note each day, to know exactly where they were. I think in this case, they were working on the writing process and where they were at. But you could also use something like this as to go back to those questions we talked about in the very first part. They put their answer to the question on here. So Jamboard is a virtual way to do it, but you can also go old school with just straight up Post-it notes. One of my new favorite things, I use it in my personal life, but we have recently started using it with our students, is Canva. Um, Canva provides opportunities for students to get really creative and create some amazing things. We had our 5th grade students created some infographics on a social studies topic they were working on. And when they finished them, they looked so slick and professional that our kids were so proud of the work. And again, it's just one opportunity to allow students to have some tools to then create that final product that might take it to that next level. So if you have not used Canva, Canva is free for education. When you go in and register with your education account, you can get the Canva for Education, and it is completely free and gets you so many features. As a whole other note, Canva also offers video editing. So for those of us living on Chromebooks that don't have access to iMovie, there are some really cool movie editing things even in Canva. Excuse me. Now, we've talked about some small shifts, and some of you might be thinking, Patience, some of those are really big shifts, but let's talk about how can we take this a whole other level. And these might be ideas for you to ponder, or they might be things that you're ready to jump in with both feet. So take a deep breath and let's take a look at these. I think the idea of I'm going to actually go out of order here, starting with a blank slate. Okay, what I mean by that is having part of your classroom doesn't have to look like a Pinterest classroom from the start. What if your students truly build your classroom as you go? I work with another amazing educator who she was able to let go of trying to have the perfect classroom before open house or before curriculum night and all of those things, because she wanted her kids to create those things. And so really allowing the students to build what your classroom looks like can really be powerful. It also is really scary to a lot of us. So maybe, again, going back to our small shifts where you just have part of your room is like that, but really allowing students to take that ownership so they feel like your classroom is a shared space. Okay, going back up to the top. The idea of a shared class website can really be a great way for students to share their learning and also communicate with parents and the community as a whole. Think about the world that our kids live in now. Paper newsletters, kids don't, I mean, that's just not part of what their life is. I know many of our parents and might want that, but imagine being able to go and have a shared class website that has information from you, but also has updates and pictures of student work and all of those amazing things. A great idea to get started is to just start with you could start with just a Google blog or a Google website. A Google site is super simple to get started. Also, if you use Seesaw, there's also a Seesaw website option you could consider too. All right, you've probably heard of Genius Hour. It was a huge thing a few years ago, and I still love the idea of it. I think the challenge is time. If your school district is anything like mine, the school day is not long enough, and there are too many mandates and not enough time or space to get any of that in. But imagine how you could work this in. So for example, our fourth grade, they were doing regions of the United States was one of the units in social studies. Not super exciting for fourth graders. So what they did is the students were able to research something from a region, whatever was important to them. So we had some students who were passionate about baseball. So they had a region and they learned about the baseball teams in that region. Or we had students who were passionate about games and gaming. They learned about where certain software companies were and how that worked. So Genius Hour doesn't have to be an all-in, like give kids whatever. It can be within the confines of your curriculum. It can also be that 15 minutes of time. We all have those little pockets of time that are just, there's not a whole lot of time, but it's enough that if kids are passionate about something, imagine how you could fill that time with allowing them to research and care about things and learn about something that's important to them. Again, if our whole goal is for our students to become self-directed learners and engaged in their classroom, there is nothing more powerful than a student being given the tools and the opportunity to research or to learn about something that is super important to them. We've all worked with those students who can tell you everything and anything about dinosaurs. Or I had a student once who was really about sharks, and I learned more about sharks that year than I ever cared to learn. But so he was able to share with me something that was important. And then when it came time for us to do a writing project or a reading task, I had that knowledge, knowing that this is something that's super important to this child. And I can then make sure that I'm including that into our curriculum. And then finally, the idea of gamification. I worked in my former district. We had a middle school teacher who had an entire Mario board and had a system for how her students earn points, and there was all these rules and amazing things. There's so many resources out there about gamification, and how that can really play into giving kids that ownership, sometimes just with content and sometimes with classroom management, and all of those pieces all tied together. Ooh. All right, so let me go back. So now what? Now what? Patients, you've shared all of these great ideas with me. What do I do next? And I think really it is about thinking about going back to that piece of paper or Google Doc that you jotted things down at the beginning about what it's like to be a student in your classroom, and take a minute to think about what are one or two of these ideas that you could put into practice to give a little more student voice and choice in your classroom. Just the small little ideas you can do. I do want to share, and I will share this presentation as well, some of the resources that have been meaningful to me, with supporting this idea of really building an opportunity for students to become self-reliant and engaged learners through student voice and choice. Thank you so much for your time. I'd love to hear how you are implementing any of these things. Please feel free to reach out, and I will be happy to, share some ideas back with you as well. Thank you so much, and have a great day.